On the 40th day, the same roar echoed across the Elah valley, a voice that had become a wound in the soul of every Israelite soldier. For the 40th time, the giant Philistine stepped into the valley and screamed the same words.
Choose a man, and have him come down to me. If he defeats me, we will be your servants. If I overcome him, you will be our servants.
Captain Thomas hadn't slept in 40 nights. Each morning and evening, the humiliation carved deeper. The Israelite soldiers cowered behind their shields, unable to look at one another.
Another morning, another challenge, and not one man moves.
Even King Saul, a man 2 meters tall, stood frozen among his troops. The silence that followed was heavier than any war cry. 40 days, 40 humiliations, and today would be no different. The army of the living God, defeated before a single arrow flew. Miles away, a teenage shepherd walked the sun-baked road, leading a donkey loaded with bread and cheese. David had no idea that only a few valleys over, an entire army was drowning in shame. He arrived at the Israelite camp, expecting the usual noise. Soldiers sharpening blades, traders shouting, laughter around fires. Instead, a suffocating stillness hung over the tents. Men sat with heads bowed, not even glancing up as he passed. Even Captain Thomas, a veteran of countless battles, looked like a man haunted. Before David could ask a single question, a sound like thunder rolled through the valley.
That is no sheep calling. What kind of beast makes a noise like that?
The soldiers around him shook, but David stood rooted, something inside him refusing to recoil. His young mind could not comprehend why such fierce warriors would tremble at a voice. He set the donkey aside and began to walk toward the front line, questions burning on his tongue. He found his eldest brother, Eliab, near the front rank. The moment Eliab saw him, his face twisted with fury.
What are you doing here, you little dreamer? Who did you leave the sheep with in the wilderness?
Before David could answer, the valley shook again. Goliath's voice thundered out the same challenge, every word clear this close. David scanned the cowering soldiers around him. Not one man met his eyes.
What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?
A nearby soldier muttered the reward. Riches, the king's daughter, tax exemption. The words spread like sparks. Soldiers began to whisper. The boy from the hills was asking dangerous questions.
Why have you come down here? With whom have you left those few sheep? I know your pride and the evil in your heart.
What have I done now? Is there not a cause?
Within the hour, word reached King Saul. A shepherd boy, untouched by fear, had asked the question no warrior dared to voice. King Saul, as sleepless as his captain, seized on the rumor like a drowning man grasping a rope. Within minutes, David stood inside the royal tent. Silk and gold framed a king who looked like a shadow.
So you are the boy asking about Goliath. What is your name?
I am David, son of Jesse. And yes, my lord, let no one's heart fail. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine.
You are but a youth, and he has been a warrior since he could lift a sword.
I have faced danger before, my king. The Lord who delivered me will deliver me again.
Saul's eyes betrayed not hope, but the hollow disbelief of a man haunted by 40 defeats.
With what weapon? He wears 57 kilos of bronze. You carry a sling.
I come in the name of the Lord of hosts. He does not save with sword or spear.
The tent fell silent. Saul stared at the shepherd, and for the first time in 40 days, something other than fear flickered in his chest.
Your faith is bold, boy, but faith is not a shield. What makes you think you can face a champion?
Your servant has kept his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth.
The king's guards shifted. They knew the predators of the hills. No shepherd went after a lion and lived.
When it turned on me, I caught it by its beard and killed it. The Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear. I killed that too. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God.
Saul's fingers, which had been drumming against his knee, went still.
The Lord. You believe he will deliver you from a spear that weighs 7 kilos, from a man who has never lost.
The Lord who saved me from the lion and the bear will save me from this Philistine.
Saul looked at the shepherd for a long moment. Then, with a voice hoarse from 40 days of silence, he spoke.
Then take my armor. If you must fight, at least wear something a champion would wear.
Servants hauled out the king's own bronze breastplate and helmet. The metal alone must have weighed 30 kilos. David tried to move. The breastplate pressed into his ribs. Every step was a stumble.
I cannot move in this. I have never tested such things.
You need protection. The giant's spear will split you like kindling.
David lifted the bronze helmet from his head. It came off with a scrape, too large for a shepherd's brow.
I cannot wear what I have not proven. The Lord does not fight with bronze, but with faith.
Saul watched the armor clatter to the ground. For a heartbeat, he looked at the boy as if he were already dead.
May the Lord be with you, then. I have nothing left to give.
David walked out of the royal tent carrying only his sling and a shepherd's heart. And somewhere in the valley, Goliath laughed. David did not return to the camp. He followed the sound of water down a rocky slope. The stream was small, almost hidden by reeds. He knelt beside it, ignoring the distant rumble of the giant's voice.
Not just one stone. He could come back, or brothers could rise.
He plunged his hand into the cold water and pulled out a smooth, round stone, then another, then a third, 4, 5, each one tested with thumb, each a perfect weight for his sling.
Goliath is not alone. The Philistines breed giants like we breed sheep.
The secret that no one else in Israel knew. Goliath had 4 brothers, Ishbi ben Ob, Saph, Lami, and an unnamed giant of Gath. David was not preparing for one duel. He was preparing for a war against an entire line of giants. He slipped the stones into his shepherd's pouch, stood, and faced the valley. 5 answers for 5 questions no one else dared ask. When he walked back to the camp, the soldiers saw something different in his step. Not bravado, certainty. Eliab stepped into David's path, his face purple with rage. The soldiers around them went still.
You stubborn fool. You put our whole family to shame. The king is watching, and you will die like a fool.
Is there not a cause? Our God is being defied. I will not stand and do nothing.
Eliab's mouth opened, but no words came. He stepped back as if struck. David walked to the front line. The shield bearers did not need an order. They parted. Captain Thomas, who had not slept in 40 nights, stood a little straighter. David crossed the line of shields and stepped onto open ground. The giant's voice still echoed, but the boy did not slow. On both hills, thousands of eyes fixed on a single shepherd walking into the valley of death. For 40 days, the Philistine had screamed his challenge. Now, for the first time, someone was answering. The silence that followed was different. Heavy, yes. But this time, it was the stillness before a storm. Goliath squinted into the sun and saw not a warrior, but a boy with a stick. His laughter rolled across the valley.
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?
The giant's shield-bearer joined the mockery, but Goliath wasn't finished.
Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the beasts.
Then Goliath cursed David by his gods, filling the air with blasphemies that made Israelite soldiers flinch. David stopped. A hush fell. When he spoke, his voice was clear, carrying to both hills.
You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head.
Goliath's sneer twisted into fury. His knuckles whitened around the spear shaft. The armies held their breath. The words were over. Now only action remained. Goliath took one step forward, and the ground seemed to shudder under his weight.
Run, boy. Run, so I can spear you like a worm on the ground.
The Israelite soldiers flinched. Shields clattered. Even the war-hardened veterans stepped back. But David did not retreat. He sprinted forward, dust exploding from his bare heels. His tunic whipped in the wind. The sling swung in his grip, a leather cord of promise. Goliath's sneer faltered. In 40 days, no Israelite had dared rush him.
He is slow. The armor makes him heavy. The Lord is my speed.
The giant raised his shield, but it was a slow, creaking motion, bronze against a blur. David's hand dipped into his pouch. 5 stones waited. He drew out one. The distance collapsed. A sling, a stone, and a prayer were all that separated a boy from a giant. David fitted the stone into the sling. The leather cradle held it like a promise. He swung the strap wide. Then overhead, the motion a blur of muscle and memory.
Years of practice. One chance. The Lord has already given him into my hand.
Goliath heard the whir, a sound like angry bees, and his eyes widened. For the first time, the giant stumbled back a step, his spear lowering in confusion. The sling bit the air, each rotation building speed. The stone became a point of deadly intention.
Now is the moment. Let go of fear. Let God do the rest.
Goliath raised his shield at last, but the bronze was heavy, his arm too slow to intercept. The whirring reached a fever pitch, a sound that sliced through the silence. The valley held its breath, and with a final, perfect revolution, David released the stone. The stone cut through the air, a silent missile, and in its path lay the undefeated champion of Gath, faster than any spear. It was a whisper of death, invisible in the noon glare. Goliath's eyes caught it at the final instant, a flicker of sunlight on polished stone. He tried to duck, but the heavy bronze helmet pinned his head like a vice. The stone slammed into the only unprotected part of his body, the forehead, gaping below the brim. A wet, sickening crack echoed across the valley, louder than any war cry. His eyes, once full of contempt, bulged wide. Then the light in them died. The 7-kilo spearhead hit the ground first, the shaft following like a falling tree. For one eternal heartbeat, the giant stood frozen, a monument of disbelief. Then his knees buckled, and the bronze-clad titan began to topple forward. The giant hit the earth face first. 57 kilos of bronze armor buckled and screamed against the stone. A cloud of dust exploded outward, swallowing the Philistine champion's bulk in a haze of defeat. For one heartbeat, silence. Then the Israelite line shattered it with a roar that shook the hills. Captain Thomas threw his head back and bellowed, not with fear but release. David did not celebrate. He sprinted toward the giant's body, reaching for the sword.
The Lord delivered him. Now finish what you promised.
Goliath's sword, a blade longer than a boy, lay glinting in the dust beside the corpse. On the Philistine hill, the soldiers froze. Their champion was a ruin, and their courage crumbled with him. David's hand closed around the hilt, still warm from the giant's grip. He pulled, and the blade scraped free, ready to fulfill the final line of the shepherd's challenge. David gripped the hilt with both hands. The sword was heavier than any shepherd's tool, a weapon of giants. He raised the blade above his head. The sun caught its edge, a flash of judgment over the valley.
You defied the living God. Now the Lord fulfills his word.
The sword fell, a single, brutal stroke that echoed off the hills like a gate slamming shut. The deed was done. David seized the giant's hair and lifted the severed head, dripping bronze and blood. A gasp rolled through the Philistine camp, then a scream, then 1,000 voices of pure terror. The Philistine line broke like a dam crumbling. Soldiers threw down spears, shields, anything to lighten their flight. David stood over the giant's body, head held high, the stone still embedded in the forehead of the fallen. The fear that had gripped Israel for 40 days now transferred to the Philistines, a contagion of panic. The champion of Gath was food for birds, and his army had become a flight of frightened sheep, driven by a shepherd's son. The Israelite line broke forward, not out of fear, but fury. 40 days of stillness ignited into a single charge.
Every sleepless night, every morning of shame, Now fuel for my legs. The giant is down, now we run.
The valley that had echoed with Goliath's taunts now rang with the war cries of a liberated army. They chased the Philistines all the way to Gath and Ekron, the road littered with abandoned armor and shattered pride. The Philistine camp became a prize. Tents full of riches, weapons, and the spoils of a humiliated army. Captain Thomas stood among his men, gasping for air, tears cutting through the dust on his face.
Tonight I will sleep. The boy did what armies could not, and the Lord has given us rest.
The soldiers gathered the armor of the fallen giant, the spear that had never tasted blood, and the helmet that now held a stone. By dusk, not a single Philistine soldier remained on Israelite soil. The 40-day siege of fear was over, and at the center of the celebration, the soldiers parted for the shepherd boy. Still holding the giant's sword, David walked through the camp, the giant's head dangling from his left hand, the bloody sword in his right. Soldiers he had never met touched his shoulder as he passed, their fingers trembling with a reverence reserved for kings. King Saul stood on a rise, watching. His crown caught the dying sun, but his face was in shadow.
He did it. The God of Israel has answered through this boy, but why not through me?
David approached the king's tent, and the crowd fell silent. Not a single whisper disturbed the moment. He placed the severed head at Saul's feet, the bronze helmet, still bearing the stone, clanked against the ground. Saul looked down at the trophy, then at the shepherd. His expression was unreadable, a mask of royal composure.
Whose son are you, young man?
I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.
Saul nodded slowly, but in the flicker of torchlight, something darker passed through his eyes, a shadow of a king who had just seen his successor. The king rose and placed a heavy hand on David's shoulder. To the crowd it looked like blessing.
From this day you shall not return to your father's house. You will stay in my service.
Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands.
The soldiers erupted in fresh cheers. Across the camp, the name David of Bethlehem passed from tent to tent like a song.
They sing for a shepherd. Soon they may forget who holds the crown.
But the king's smile did not reach his eyes, and his hand on David's shoulder tightened just a moment too long.
The Lord brought me here for this day. I will trust him for the days to come.
As the torches burned low and the camp settled, an uneasy quiet replaced the celebration. Victory tasted sweet, but something bitter lingered. The champion was dead, but the throne was suddenly less safe, and Saul knew it. David walked to the edge of the camp, the giant's sword still in his hand, and gazed out at the valley that had been a grave, now a field of stars. From the edge of the camp, David's brothers watched in silence. Eliab, who had called him a dreamer, could not meet his own eyes.
I mocked him. I said he had an evil heart, and God chose him to deliver Israel.
The army, once paralyzed by fear, now burned with a faith it had nearly forgotten. Men who had not prayed in years fell to their knees.
The Lord of hosts is still with us. That boy reminded us what I had lost, the certainty that God fights for his people.
David did not drink in the praise. When soldiers called him champion, he pointed upward. He knew who had thrown the stone.
The Lord used me because I was willing, not because I am strong. He could have used a sparrow.
The 5 stones in his pouch were not a strategy. They were a testimony. Each smooth surface reminded him that God prepares his instruments in quiet places. Captain Thomas approached, no longer hollow-eyed but clear and heavy with gratitude. He clasped David's shoulder without words.
You gave us back more than a battle. You gave us back the name of our God.
David simply nodded. The sword he held was a trophy, but it would rust. The faith he had shown would ripple through Israel for 1,000 years. The sun finally surrendered behind the hills, painting the Elah Valley in crimson and gold. Goliath's armor was stripped, his spear and helmet taken as relics of a day God fought for his people. The head of the Philistine champion was carried to Jerusalem, a grim testimony that no flesh may boast before the Almighty. But David slipped away from the celebration. The sling, not the sword, stayed in his hand. The battle is the Lord's. That was not a boast. It was the deepest truth a shepherd ever learned. He stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, the same height from which the giant had taunted, and he was still a boy, still a shepherd, still carrying stones in his pouch. But something in his eyes said he would never be just a shepherd again. He turned east toward the hills of Bethlehem and began to walk. Behind him, a camp that had known 40 days of terror now hummed with songs of deliverance, and a king slept with one eye open, while a shepherd walked into a future no one could yet see. The road home was long, but David's feet were light. The stars he had known as a shepherd now watched over a champion. In the years to come, mothers would tell their children about the day a boy with a sling silenced a giant. Men would forget Goliath's name for a time, but the boy's name would be sung in the gates. David would not always walk this quietly. There would be caves and wars, and a crown heavy on his head. But tonight, there was only the crunch of sandals on a dusty path, and the whisper of a sling against his thigh.
The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters.
He did not know it, but the prayer that formed in his heart would one day be written for all Israel to sing. The stones in his pouch were not used, but they were not forgotten. They would remind him that God fights for those who trust. And when the future grew dark, as it would, he would look at the stars and remember the giant fell because a boy believed. On that night, walking home, David was simply a shepherd, and that was enough. The valley remembered. 40 days it had heard a giant's challenge, and now it heard only the wind brushing over the stones. Goliath, nearly 3 meters tall, armored in 57 kilos of bronze, was dead, and the weapon that felled him was a shepherd's sling and a river stone. Yet the stone was not the true weapon. The true weapon was a faith that did not flinch when the mountain mocked. David did not win because he was stronger or faster. He won because he came not with a sword, but in the name of the Lord of hosts. That is the lesson that echoes longer than any war cry. The battle is the Lord's, and if the battle is the Lord's, then no giant is too tall, no armor too thick, and no odds too impossible. The giant fell face first into the dust, not because of a shepherd's skill, but because of a shepherd's trust in his God. 3 millennia later, the story is still told, not of Goliath's size, but of David's faith. For when a boy believes that God stands with him, even a stone becomes a thunderbolt, and even a shepherd becomes a king. That is why this story never dies. It is not about a giant. It is about a God who fights for those who trust him. The valley fell silent at last, no longer a stage for giants, but a memorial to a teenager's trust. The armies returned home, but the story refused to be buried in the dust. On a rock beneath the stars, a leather sling and a single smooth stone lay as a quiet testimony. 40 days of humiliation, 1 stone. A teenager who refused to let fear write the end. His name was David, and he carried the name of the living God into the valley of death. The giant fell not by a shepherd's skill, but by a shepherd's faith in his God. 3 millennia later, that same faith still topples giants of fear, doubt, and impossibility, because the battle belongs to the Lord, and he has never lost.